called Mapping Yolanda. One Friday night, the winter I was 12, my mom's brother, Theo Irwin, showed up at my grandmother's apartment in Jamaica Plain with his new wife. She was 15. They'd met during his recent trip to Guatemala. She looked like any one of my cousins, only she didn't weigh as much. Her smile stretched, revealing teeth so white they looked like they'd glow in the dark. She was short like Theo and had fluffy, frizzy hair, and her skin was the same color as the outside of a loaf of bread. "This is Yolanda," Theo Edwin said. Underneath the buzzing fluorescent light in my grandmother's kitchen, he draped his arm over his bride's shoulder. They practically purred. When I kissed Yolanda's cheek, I inhaled her scent, a combination of incense and floral perfume. She tickled my chubby middle and giggled when I stood back, startled. My mom tore the lid off the box of Dunkin' Donuts and set the box on the table where my aunt sat, their elbows resting on the green and white checkered tablecloth. "Niños," she said, "váyanse para la sala." We were banned from the kitchen so the women could get to know Yolanda. The living room was crowded with mustached uncles, including Theo Erwin, and my dad, who said, "Mija," and pushed his lips toward the kitchen. "My daughter, you should go play with your cousins." Kids were forbidden from playing in the bedrooms too, so we were left with a linoleum strip of hallway. We cousins ranged in age from 6-year-old David, a fan of Ninja Turtles, to 16-year-old Erica, with her feathered bangs and Guns N' Roses t-shirts. Unlike most of my cousins, I adored Barbies and pogo balls and puffy painted tops. My sister's parents and I lived in a neighborhood where the only nighttime sound was a recycle bin rattling down a driveway. My parents agreed that education was important. It was the reason they left their homeland of Guatemala and later abandoned Boston. They believed the suburbs meant security. Good schools, organized sports, a library down the street. My mother pushed the idea of college on us before we could write in cursive. We took elective classes in French and read chapter books for fun. Many of my cousins, on the other hand, lived in Section 8 housing and changed schools often. But when we were all together in the pocket of Friday night, we were the same. We played checkers and compared our favorite scenes in the Goonies. We played Go Fish with a sticky deck of cards. Eventually, we would teach Yolanda how to play too. From where I sat that first night, cross-legged in the hallway next to the kitchen, I could see Yolanda's round face, mischievous grin, and nostrils wide as dimes. My grandmother sat closest to Yolanda, who was eating a Boston cream donut. Yolanda wore a long cotton skirt and a Celtics jacket. From my aunt's head nods and thick fingers raised in the air, it seemed like someone was making a speech. I leaned closer and snatched what I could. Uno nunca sabe, tiene que cuidarse. One never knows what. You must take care of yourself. They hadn't said, be careful. That was something we constantly heard. Be careful riding the scooter. Don't go past the yellow house where the Chinese family lives. Be careful swimming or you might drown like Monica almost did one summer. You must take care of yourself implied a further concern. Whatever filled that space, I wouldn't know for years. That spring, we celebrated my birthday with a barbecue at Lars Anderson Park. Surrounded by shades of green, my cousins and I were allowed to be as loud as we wanted, without downstairs neighbors calling the cops to complain about them spics. I was 13, so I was too old to play tag. Instead, I sat at the wooden picnic table and licked the salt off Cape Cod potato chips. I placed one on my tongue and let it dissolve like the wafers at Mass. Theo Erwin showed up again, this time without his teenage bride. "Is Yolanda here?" he asked, out of breath. My mother ripped apart a head of iceberg lettuce and arranged the leaves onto a ceramic plate. "No?" Theo massaged his temples with his palms. "She was gone when I woke up." Later, we found out that Yolanda had been sleepwalking. I imagined her black jelly shoe sandals swishing past the triple-decker apartments, down the concrete hill, reaching Hyde Square, and heading to the supermarket or church. These were the only places she'd find someone to speak Spanish to, someone to tell about the baby kicking inside her expanding belly. After that, Theo Edwin put newspapers on the rug next to her side of the bed so he'd hear if she got up in the middle of the night. Who knows where she would have wandered? My mother seemed especially concerned for Yolanda. Maybe it was because they'd grown up in neighboring colonias in Guatemala, or maybe she knew more than she would admit. Years later, one day, my mother called to tell me about Yolanda. I was in my dorm room in college, sitting on my twin bed propped up by cinder blocks. My feet dangled off the edge, and through the window I could see that autumn had set the tops of trees ablaze in reds, oranges, and yellows. Listen, Yolanda called the cops on your tío the other night. She was screaming, acting crazy, tore at her own clothes, clawed her face with her nails. See? And she told the police that your tío did it. They were going to arrest him, but one of the police checked Yolanda's hands and found blood under her nails. Oh my God, I said. My roommate walked in wearing a bathrobe and holding a dorm shower caddy. Who's pregnant now? She said. I'll call you back, I told my mom. That winter, the Edwin, devastated, moved from Boston to Framingham with Jonathan, their son, who was now in elementary school. No one saw Yolanda for a long time. If the adults still talked to her, I didn't know. Eventually, we lowered our heads at the mention of her name. She became hazy in my memory, nothing like the girl who had tickled my middle in my grandmother's kitchen 7 years before. To my surprise, during one of my trips home from college, my mother suggested we visit Yolanda. She had turned up after all, been in the vicinity all along, but lost to us. It had been years since I saw her. It was Christmas Day. We arrived at her rundown apartment building in Boston. What looked like urine and grease stained the sidewalk. Cars splashed through slush puddles along the one-way avenue. The air was cold and still. Graffiti marked up the bus stop signs. I breathed through my mouth to avoid the stench from the metal garbage can. The apartment buzzer didn't sound when I pushed it. All the other buttons were cracked or missing. My mom searched for pebbles on the ground and tossed a handful up to the second floor window, the sound of keys tapping on a typewriter. Yolanda, open the door, it's Dora. She hesitated. And Jennifer, she wants to say hi. We were buzzed in. We stepped past the glass door and climbed the stairs. The muffled sound of a television filled the carpeted hall. We twisted our bodies so a man in a leather jacket coming down the staircase wouldn't knock us over. My mother tugged the sleeve of my black peacoat and said, "We're not going to stay long. I just want to see how she is." We stood in front of her apartment door, wiping our boots on a welcome mat that was missing the L and C. The door opened, and there was Yolanda, tucking her frizzy hair behind her ears. It was cut short, just above her shoulders. She'd gained weight, maybe 50 pounds. Her red sweatshirt hugged tight around her hips, and her stonewashed jeans belonged to another decade. My mother asked if she remembered me. She nodded. "Come in," she said in a whisper. In the living room, a wide-shouldered, dark-haired man was asleep on the couch. Yolanda made no introductions or explanations. Pieces of duct tape kept the blinds down along the windowsill. The space smelled of sleep. I stood close to my mother. "Long time," Yolanda said, squinting. "Let's go in the kitchen." "Oh yeah, Feliz Navidad." In the kitchen, a little boy and girl sat on wooden chairs playing video games. The boy didn't look up, just clicked away at the neon screen. Chocolate milk splotches ran down the front of the little girl's pink sweatshirt. My mother baby-stepped her way over and slowly picked the girl up from under her arms, hugging her tight. "My daughter," Yolanda said, "and that's my son." No one mentioned Jonathan. Yolanda ordered them to share a seat and insisted we sit down, giving us each our own chair. Within seconds, she was crying as if we'd just revealed terrible news. "I know," my mother said. "It's okay." I had no idea what they were talking about. Maybe I still believed I wasn't allowed to join the adults in the kitchen, or maybe I didn't want to be part of this. It was easier, safer to remain in the role of the child. Cowardly, polite. I didn't know what to say to Yolanda anyway, so I stayed quiet and looked around the room. The kids wore mismatched socks. Dishes cluttered the counters. A mass health magnet secured a child's drawing of a butterfly to the refrigerator. I felt far away, not only from all this, but strangely far away from myself. We didn't stay long. On our way out, my mother slipped Yolanda a $20 bill, not because she asked, but because that It was and is still the kind of thing my mother does. In the car, my mother said that even with sun and rain, some fruit still falls, still spoils. Some days after our visit with Yolanda in her cave-like apartment, I heard that she had attacked her mother, who was still living with her, helping with the 2 new children as she had with Jonathan. Yolanda tried to stab her with a pair of scissors. The state took away Yolanda's kids, and she was admitted to a mental health institution. I never saw her again. 2 years later, I came home to Boston for good. Once home, I felt the absence of my cousins who had moved away. Some followed work, Texas, California, Indiana. Others followed war, Iraq, Afghanistan, North Carolina, in between. One was serving time. Most of the girls had had babies. We were all spread out, moving farther away from that linoleum strip of hallway in our grandmother's walk-up. Even as adults, we cousins remained the children of parents who wanted more from life and believed that moving to America would achieve it. Our stories might begin and end in a different place, but we inherited the belief that leaving was part of the formula for progress. But now I sense that the reason for departure was as important as the destination. Yolanda wasn't merely seeking opportunities in the United States. She was trying to escape the past. Years later, at my parents' house, I finally asked my mother to fill in the gaps of Yolanda's story, a narrative that began long before the day she had arrived in Boston. My mother was sitting at the dining room table sewing the hem on a pair of my jeans. She was so young, she said. I stared at the Impressionist painting on the opposite wall, a cafe in Paris, a framed print my mother had picked up at a yard sale. Yolanda was 14, not 15 when she came. What other details, I wondered, had my mother smudged from the past? As a girl, she explained, Yolanda helped her mother clean the rooms at a brothel. She'd been raped. I was thankful for the sudden noise of the needle, stitching at a high speed. My mother used her teeth to cut a loose piece of thread. She was still a girl when she left for the United States with your Theo, imagine. How did they meet, I asked. On the street. I cleared my throat. Not like that. Everyone hangs out on the street there. It's not like here. Your Theo was in Guatemala and Doña Consuelo saw that he was a good man. So that's it? A good man is hanging out on the street and you send your teenage daughter to live with him in another country? Things are different there, my mother said. My uncle was a prince on a white horse, or a prince with a blue passport. Maybe Yolanda's mother hoped that sending her daughter to the United States would give her a new beginning, the kind that would even delete the past, but it hadn't. When Doña Consuelo's moved to Boston, when she moved to Boston to help with Jonathan, she seemed only to make things worse. Her presence probably ignited painful memories for Yolanda. We didn't know how to help her, my mother said. I welcomed the hypnotic hum of the sewing machine. We have no control over the circumstances into which we're born. The ropes we reach for in trying to soar somewhere new, somewhere better, often carry us to unpredictable places. How would Yolanda's life have played out had she never left Guatemala? How would my mother's have turned out if she hadn't either? In all the stories she told about the small Central American country that would be the source of comparison for everything my sisters and I ate, wore, and read, she was teaching us about the world and to appreciate what we had. Here, she handed me the jeans and placed her elbows on the table the way my aunts had done that first night Yolanda had arrived at my grandmother's apartment. Thanks, I said. As I folded them at the knee, I could just see Yolanda with her frizzy hair, seated at another table somewhere, playing cards in a pale-painted room, and with her mischievous smile saying, "Go fish, go fish."